Today, I'm going to talk to you about focusing on productive skills to teach grammar inductively. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what grammar is, why it's important, why maybe it's not important. Then we're going to talk a little bit about grammatical competence, communicative grammatical competence, and how communicative grammatical competence contrasts with pragmatic competence in second language acquisition. After that, I'll explain what an inductive approach to teaching grammar is and why it is important for second language teachers to use an inductive approach to teaching grammar in the classroom with their students. Finally, I'll make sure that I give you some specific examples of lessons that use an inductive approach to teaching grammar and focus on productive skills in second language acquisition. I'll also tell you some tips for how to make your own lessons using an inductive approach for teaching grammar. Now let's get started. First, I'd like to ask you to complete these two sentences. First, grammar is important because ... Second, grammar is not important because ... What do you think? Well, some of you may have answered that grammar is important because students need correct grammar to do well on tests. And students need correct grammar to communicate with other people. Second language learners need to use correct grammar when talking to native speakers and non-native speakers so that their message is understood. However, some of you may think that grammar is not important because other types of errors may impede conversation even more than grammatical errors. And some of you may have answered that grammar is not important because even with incorrect grammar, it is possible to establish some level of communicative competence. It is possible to get the message across without using completely correct grammar. Well, let's think about that as we move on to some other issues related to teaching grammar with an inductive approach. Now, whether grammar is important or whether grammar is not important may not be the question. When thinking about teaching grammar inductively, perhaps first we should ask ourselves the question, what is grammar? For some teachers and for a lot of students, grammar can be a very scary monster. It can be Grammarzilla. However, grammar shouldn't really be that frightening for teachers or for students. Basically, grammar is just a set of rules for combining words to express meaning. Now, even with that set of rules for expressing words to convey meaning, we should keep in mind that communication is not successful until the message is understood. Communication does not take place when the message is said. Communication takes place when the message is understood. And grammar is only one vehicle to get that message understood correctly. With that in mind, we should think of a sentence like, the tree is flying under the ground. The tree is flying under the ground? Kind of a strange sentence. Grammatically correct, but basically it doesn't have any meaning. So yes, grammar is important. Practicing grammar is important. But correct grammar and correct grammar usage doesn't guarantee a high level of communicative competence. In addition to grammatical competence, we also need communicative competence. Now, let's put these together, communicative competence and grammatical competence. Let's put those together and call it communicative grammatical competence. That is the ability to use and understand a structure in a variety of situations spontaneously. Now, if a student learns a sentence in the classroom, such as, the girl is wearing a blue dress, going out into public and using that. The girl is wearing a blue dress, the man is wearing a blue hat, the student is wearing a green sweater, the nurse is wearing a white uniform. Same grammatical structure over and over, but you're not using it spontaneously. So, the point is, communicative grammatical competence is the ability to understand a structure in a variety of situations spontaneously. To be able to learn something in a classroom and then go out into the real world and use those grammatical structures in a meaningful way and with spontaneity. Let's talk about the process of how that happens. Going from the classroom to the real world. In this discussion on communicative competence, one of the things we want to think about is how grammar and pragmatics go together or are separate. Let's look at some examples. If you are in a restaurant and you want a glass of water, you can simply look at the waiter, hold up your glass, and say, "Water, water, water." There's no grammar there, that's just one word. The message gets across, the waiter will understand that you want a glass of water. Now, let's add a little bit of grammar. 2 words. Water please, water please, water please. With that, you're making a request. How about if we say, "Give me a glass of water, give me a glass of water." Now, depending on the situation, it may sound a little bit impolite, but it's grammatically correct. "Give me a glass of water." Grammatically correct, but pragmatically incorrect. The waiter will obviously think the customer is rude. "May I have a glass of water, please?" "May I have a glass of water, please?" That is much more polite. There we have grammatical competence and pragmatic competence. How about one more? Let's look at this example. "Could you get me a glass of water, please? Could you get me a glass of water, please?" That sounds pretty well. "Could you get me a glass of water, please?" Grammatically, a higher level. Pragmatically, pretty much the same as, "May I have a glass of water, please?" "May I have a glass of water, please?" "Could you give me a glass of water, please?" Now, let's look at one more. "What I desire at this moment in time would be a delightfully chilled glass of water from you." Wow. Now, that's quite a sentence. Grammatically correct, pragmatically, I don't know, a bit excessive. What would the waiter think if you said this sentence in a restaurant? Grammatical accuracy and pragmatic accuracy do differ. Now, for teachers, an inductive approach to teaching grammar involves active learning in productive skill practice. If we think back to the famous saying, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn." Whether these words are from Benjamin Franklin or from Confucius doesn't matter. It's the same message. Involving students in the learning process is essential for them to learn. Now, an inductive approach to teaching grammar involves several things. First, an inductive approach facilitates understanding of grammatical structures in the natural order of language acquisition. For example, it's important for students to practice and use present tense before acquiring the ability to use past tense. This is the natural order. Babies learning their first language will use present tense before they start understanding past tense. For second language English learners, they will learn the ed form of past tense before they start to acquire the irregular verbs. For example, want, wanted, work, worked. That will come before irregular verbs such as lent, lent, teach, taught, bring, brought. In addition, an inductive approach is similar to a student's interlanguage development. Interlanguage development is that area between what they know in their first language, what they know in their second language, comparing what they know in their first language with what they think they know in their second language, and making deductions and guesses about what they think would be correct in the second language. Now, they learn what they don't know. From learning what they don't know or where they're making mistakes, they're able to fill in gaps. Next, as students practice various grammatical structures in a classroom situation or outside of a classroom situation, they develop a feeling for grammar similar to their first language acquisition. In addition, an inductive approach to teaching grammar increases intrinsic motivation by minimizing aspects of language learning that could be considered tedious or boring for teachers and for students. Whether you're a teacher or a student, there's been times, I'm sure, where you've been in a classroom during a grammar lesson and all of a sudden the energy level just starts to drop. Oh, grammar again. Oh. For teachers, it's very difficult facing a group of students when 50% of them are starting to fall asleep because the grammar lesson is so boring. Well, an inductive approach to teaching grammar changes that. An inductive approach to teaching grammar gets students involved in producing sentences, producing grammatical structures in a fun and interesting way so that they don't even know they're practicing the grammatical structure most of the time. This makes the lesson a little more interesting, hopefully a lot more interesting, and we all know that more interest means more motivation. More motivation means more learning. An inductive approach to teaching grammar allows for students to discover the rules of grammar usage, thereby retaining an understanding for those rules longer. As you use the grammar and start understanding why that grammatical structure is correct, and start understanding the rules for that grammatical structure, that leads to long-term memory. That leads to a greater retention and a greater understanding for those grammatical rules. Often, grammar lessons don't use meaningful language, and it's essential that students practice meaningful language in the classroom so that outside of the classroom they can use that meaningful language in real situations and develop some spontaneity in using certain grammatical structures in conversation outside of the classroom. That is the first step, the second step, and the third step toward grammatical competence. There are several assumptions. It's important that we realize these assumptions. The younger the students, the less likely they will be able to understand abstract concepts. The lower the proficiency level, the less likely students will be able to use intricate grammatical structures. Also, the more linguistic distance between a student's first language and the second language, the target language, the more practice students will need to master new grammatical structures. Finally, full grammatical competence will come at a later stage. According to Penny there are 4 stages for teaching grammar. First is presentation, where you give some examples of how a grammatical structure is used for the students. Next is isolation and explanation. Isolating the grammatical structure and giving it some explanation, not a detailed grammatical explanation, especially for young learners, but explaining to students what it means and how to use it. This you want to keep as minimal as possible. Otherwise, it becomes more of a deductive approach than an inductive approach. Next would be students practicing that grammatical structure in pair work or group work. And finally, testing. Now, testing doesn't necessarily mean giving students a piece of paper and a quiz and giving them 15 minutes to answer a few questions. Testing can be some type of performance-based assessment. The practice stage essentially focuses on productive skills, speaking and writing. The encourage output stage is where teachers encourage students to produce language, perhaps beginning by repetition, where students are learning the grammatical structure or the sound or even the rhythm of the language. The guided output stage is highly intentional, where a teacher provides certain exercises that are very structured, such as cloze exercises or information gaps. Information gaps can be pair work where one student asks another student questions and then they switch roles. The guided output stage perhaps is less intentional, using new target structures in productive skills assignments. I'll give you a couple examples of that in a minute. Next, incidental output. Incidental output is very much like grammatical competence, where there's a lot of spontaneity. This is the ability to use new grammatical structures spontaneously, elaborate rehearsal, where students have actually mastered certain grammatical structures and can use those structures spontaneously. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Once again, my name is Brian English, and I hope you've enjoyed this short presentation, and I hope you learned something about how to focus on productive skills for teaching grammar inductively. Have a great day. See you next time.